Araminta's story in Bridgerton season 4 part 2 seems like it's about love and power, but the truth is far darker. What looks like a carefully planned life filled with advantage and charm slowly unravels into a chain of mistakes that leave her trapped, vulnerable, and alone. Fans thought they knew her ending, but the reality is harsher than anyone expected. Every smile she flashes, every plan she executes, carries hidden consequences: the glittering balls, the laughter in grand halls, and the whispered gossip all mask a growing tension. Behind her poised appearance lies a story of ambition, betrayal, and choices that set her on a path no one wants to follow. By the time this season reaches its final moments, it's not just heartbreak on the surface. It's the weight of isolation and regret that makes her ending so devastating. Araminta's journey is a cautionary tale of how ambition, without awareness, can lead to outcomes worse than anyone imagines. And it's this stark truth that fans are only beginning to understand. Araminta starts the season as someone who seems confident and in control. She navigates high society with grace, charming those around her, and making decisions that appear clever on the surface. She has influence, a certain social standing, and connections that many envy. However, beneath that poised exterior, she faces hidden struggles that are not obvious at first glance. Every decision she makes carries weight, and the social world she inhabits is filled with unseen rules, expectations, and judgments. She must constantly balance her own desires with what society expects, and that pressure begins to build slowly throughout the season. Unlike other characters who show their feelings openly, Araminta is careful. She hides doubt, fear, and worry behind a carefully constructed mask of confidence. Fans may not notice it at first, but small moments reveal cracks in her armor. A glance at a disappointed ally, a quiet comment at a ball, or a subtle reaction from her family starts to hint that her world isn't as perfect as it seems. Every calculated move has a ripple effect. When she tries to manipulate situations in her favor, she inadvertently sets up small obstacles that grow into larger problems later. It's this subtle chain of cause and effect that makes her story both tragic and fascinating. While other characters might face immediate consequences for their actions, Araminta's challenges are quieter, slower, and more psychologically painful. She is constantly assessing situations, trying to anticipate reactions, and planning the perfect response. Yet, no matter how careful she is, the pressure of high society, personal desires, and hidden rivalries begins to close in. Each ball, dinner, or casual conversation carries the potential to disrupt her plans, her relationships, especially with close friends and potential romantic interests, become increasingly complicated. Trust is a fragile concept, and Araminta's reliance on appearances makes it even more difficult. Her charm can attract allies, but it can also attract enemies who are equally cunning and willing to manipulate her for their own gain. Even as she celebrates small victories, there is a growing sense that everything is temporary. The tension between what she wants and what she can control begins to mount, creating a quiet unease that builds throughout the season. Every subtle misstep, every small miscalculation, adds to a sense of impending doom that only becomes fully clear later. By examining her early choices, it becomes evident that Araminta is not just a character enjoying society's privileges. She is someone whose life is structured around careful planning, yet those plans are vulnerable to unexpected twists and unseen consequences. Her ending is shaped as much by what she cannot control as by what she actively chooses, and this delicate balance is what makes her story feel so tragic. Viewers who only see her surface confidence may miss the internal struggle, the pressure, and the slow unraveling of her plans. Her story reminds us that appearances can be deceiving. What seems like triumph on the outside may hide fear, regret, and a creeping sense of loss. Araminta's journey in this section sets the stage for the darker outcomes to come, showing that the seeds of disaster are often planted quietly and unnoticed, long before anyone sees the final result. In the world of Bridgerton, even the smallest decisions can have monumental consequences. And Araminta's early maneuvers make it clear that the season is carefully building toward a conclusion that is far harsher than anyone might expect. As the season progresses, the careful control Araminta thought she had begins to slip. The very alliances she counted on start to show cracks, and the people she trusted most reveal their own ambitions, which don't always align with hers at first. These are small signs: a look of disapproval from someone she considered loyal, a whispered conversation that leaves her uneasy, or a subtle slight that challenges her authority in social circles. Each of these moments seems minor, almost insignificant, but they slowly accumulate, undermining her confidence. What makes Araminta's turning point so compelling is that it doesn't arrive with a single dramatic event. It's gradual, psychological, and frustratingly subtle. She starts to realize that her strategies, which once gave her a sense of power, are becoming traps instead. Every plan she executes to secure her position, to maintain her image, and to manipulate outcomes in her favor, now carries unintended consequences. A favor she requested from an ally turns into a demand for loyalty she cannot fulfill. A secret she hoped to keep hidden begins to leak in the quiet corners of London society. A relationship she nurtured for personal gain starts to fracture under the weight of jealousy, misunderstanding, and mistrust. Araminta's situation illustrates one of the harshest truths about power and influence. No matter how clever you are, you can't control the choices of others, and in her world, the smallest misstep can trigger a cascade of events that spirals out of control. The pressure mounts not only externally but internally as well. She becomes increasingly tense, second-guessing every action and analyzing every conversation for hidden meaning. Her charm, which once seemed like an infallible shield, now feels like a fragile mask that barely conceals the fear and doubt building within her in moments of solitude. She reflects on her decisions, wondering if she misjudged intentions or miscalculated outcomes. Even her closest confidants, who once offered guidance or support, now seem distant, either distracted by their own ambitions or subtly critical of her moves. This growing isolation intensifies the sense of inevitable failure, making every subsequent choice heavier and more fraught with risk. Fans watching her arc begin to sense that Araminta's journey is no longer about advancement or romance. It's about survival, reputation, and avoiding mistakes that could irreparably damage her. Her sharp mind, which allowed her to navigate social hierarchies with skill, is now a source of anxiety. Every calculation feels like a gamble, and the margin for error shrinks with each passing scene. By this stage in the story, even seemingly innocuous events take on ominous significance. A casual comment at a party, a misplaced letter, or a revealing glance becomes evidence of vulnerability she cannot ignore. The tension escalates quietly but relentlessly, creating a sense of suspense that grips viewers. This is what makes her turning point so effective. The audience feels the slow unraveling of control, the shift from confidence to precariousness, and the creeping realization that her ending may not be what it initially appeared to be. It's no longer just a story of charm and social maneuvering. It's a psychological thriller of personal miscalculations, social pressure, and the consequences of choices made without full foresight. Araminta's carefully constructed world, once glittering and seemingly secure, begins to feel like a cage. The walls close in not through overt conflict, but through the accumulation of tension, suspicion, and betrayal. Each interaction is a potential threat, each decision a possible downfall. In this part of the story, the audience begins to understand that her ending is shaped not only by dramatic events, but by a long chain of subtle errors, misread signals, and uncontrollable variables that highlight the fragility of her position. The turning point emphasizes that in Bridgerton's world, appearances can deceive, and no amount of charm or strategy can completely shield someone from the consequences of others' choices. This slow collapse, this mounting tension, prepares the stage for the darker, more devastating consequences that follow, making Araminta's story one of the most psychologically gripping arcs of the season. By this point in the season, Araminta's carefully controlled life begins to unravel at a faster pace. The decisions she once thought clever now start to work against her, creating consequences she could never have predicted. Every misstep she makes isn't just isolated, it triggers a chain reaction that affects her relationships, her reputation, and even her sense of self. One of the biggest mistakes comes from underestimating the people around her. She assumes that loyalty, charm, or subtle persuasion will keep allies aligned with her. But in reality, many of the people in her circle have their own agendas. Friends who appeared supportive quietly question her motives, rivals who seemed harmless exploit her vulnerabilities, and even family members act in ways that complicate her position. Each interaction carries hidden tension. And Araminta begins to notice that the social safety net she relied on is slowly disappearing. Another critical miscalculation is her overconfidence in controlling. Moments that were once opportunities now feel like traps, and every decision carries the weight of potential disaster. Even her charm, which previously protected her, now has limits. People begin to see through the calculated veneer, and her influence diminishes. By examining these mistakes, it becomes clear why her ending is worse than anyone anticipated. It's not just about one big error, it's the accumulation of smaller miscalculations, misunderstandings, and overlooked threats that slowly but surely corner her. The season carefully constructs this chain reaction, showing how ambition without awareness can create irreversible consequences. Social maneuvering, clever strategy, and charm can only go so far when the forces around you shift unpredictably. Araminta's journey in this section demonstrates a key truth of Bridgerton's world. The higher one climbs, the further one can fall. Every attempt to maintain power, secure relationships, or preserve reputation carries the risk of backfiring. And in her case, it does. By the time the audience sees the full effect of her mistakes, it's clear that Araminta is no longer the poised, in control figure she once seemed. Instead, she is trapped in a web of her own making, surrounded by fractured relationships, exposed vulnerabilities, and the growing consequences of each misstep. The tension and psychological strain in these moments make her arc uniquely tragic. Her mistakes don't just affect her standing in society, they impact her emotional state, her sense of identity, and her capacity to act decisively. This careful unraveling is what sets up the darker, more devastating ending, showing that sometimes the worst consequences are not sudden or dramatic, but slow, cumulative, and inescapable. By the end of this section, the audience begins to fully grasp that Araminta's downfall is a product of both her choices and the environment she cannot control, making her ending far more tragic and haunting than it initially appeared. By the time the season reaches its climax, the ripple effects of Araminta's earlier decisions become unavoidable, and the carefully constructed world she relied on begins to crumble completely. What seemed like small errors or minor misjudgments early on now escalate into a series of irreversible consequences that touch every aspect of her life. Relationships she thought were solid are revealed to be fragile. Alliances she counted on have shifted or vanished, and trust, which once protected her, is shattered. In moments where she once could act decisively, Araminta now finds herself paralyzed by uncertainty, aware that any step she takes could worsen her position. The social environment she once mastered now feels like a maze she cannot navigate, where every familiar face could be a source of betrayal, and every conversation carries hidden implications. This gradual but relentless collapse makes her ending more psychologically devastating than a simple loss or rejection. It's a realization that her control was always an illusion, and the stability she relied on was temporary at best. Financial, social, and emotional pressures converge, leaving her isolated at a moment when connection and support are most necessary. Even her romantic prospects, often seen as a source of comfort or strategic advantage, falter under scrutiny and misalignment of intentions. People she tried to manipulate for her gain turn away or act in ways that contradict her plans, leaving her with fewer options and a growing sense of vulnerability. The audience begins to see that Araminta's tragedy is not caused by a single enemy, or a dramatic betrayal. It is born from a lifetime of small choices, compounded by the impossibility of predicting human behavior and the relentless rules of her social world. Her poised exterior, which once masked ambition and confidence, now hides a mixture of fear, regret, and helplessness. Even minor setbacks feel magnified. And every interaction becomes a reminder of her dwindling power, the emotional weight of. Her downfall is heightened by the contrast between her initial control and her eventual powerlessness. This makes her story feel uniquely painful. She is not struck down suddenly, but rather consumed slowly by consequences she could have avoided. With greater awareness or humility, viewers may have expected her to emerge triumphant or at least retain some semblance of dignity, but the season reveals a more sobering reality. Araminta is left confronting the outcomes of choices that, while initially strategic, ultimately isolated her from allies, friends, and opportunities she once took for granted. The final moments emphasize the harsh truth of her journey. Charm and ambition cannot shield someone from the unpredictable nature of human relationships and social dynamics. Her ending carries a quiet yet profound sorrow, showing that the consequences of miscalculation are often more painful than dramatic reversals or sudden betrayals. This season also highlights the emotional toll this isolation takes on Araminta. She grapples with guilt, frustration, and the bitter awareness that some situations cannot be corrected. No matter how much she wishes otherwise, the very traits that once gave her an advantage, intelligence, charm, and ambition, now feel like burdens, because they heightened expectations and created a fragile foundation that could not withstand the pressure of unfolding events. In the context of the Bridgerton world, where appearances are everything and missteps can be fatal to reputation, Araminta's downfall is particularly striking. It demonstrates that even a character who seems in control, who plans meticulously, and who navigates society with skill is vulnerable to the compounding effects of small mistakes, misunderstandings, and shifting loyalties. The result is a layered, tragic ending that resonates beyond immediate events. It is an emotional consequence of years of navigating a complex social hierarchy where every choice carries weight. By the conclusion of her story, the audience is left with a haunting impression. Araminta's downfall is not sudden, flashy, or dramatic in the traditional sense, but it is far more devastating because it is slow, inevitable, and deeply personal. The quiet devastation, the isolation, and the realization of powerlessness make her ending one of the darkest and most psychologically impactful arcs of the season. This is why, for many fans, her fate lingers long after the credits roll, leaving a sense of unease and a clear understanding that ambition without foresight in a world so dependent on perception can be far more destructive than anyone initially imagined. When Araminta's story comes to its quiet but devastating conclusion, fans across social media quickly react, sharing a mix of shock, disbelief, and frustration. Many viewers expected her to achieve some form of triumph or at least maintain her social position, but the subtle cruelty of her ending leaves a lingering sense of unease. On platforms like Twitter, Reddit, and TikTok, fans debate the implications of her choices, dissecting every scene where her confidence began to falter. Some focus on the obvious consequences of her miscalculations, pointing out the failed alliances, fractured relationships, and social isolation that build up over the season. Others dig deeper, speculating on what her story reveals about ambition, societal pressure, and the fragile nature of appearances in the Bridgerton universe. One recurring theme in fan discussions is the idea that Araminta's downfall feels almost inevitable. They note that her initial strategies, while clever, depended too heavily on controlling others and manipulating perception. When these external factors inevitably shifted, her plans collapse like a house of cards. Fans appreciate the storytelling subtlety, recognizing that the show doesn't punish her with a single dramatic moment, but instead constructs a slow, cumulative series of consequences that are both believable and haunting. Many viewers connect with the psychological dimension of her journey. They comment on how relatable it is to feel trapped by decisions made in the past, To watch careful plans unravel despite one's best efforts, and to realize that reputation, influence, and control can slip away quietly, often unnoticed until it's too late. These discussions reveal that Araminta's story resonates beyond the confines of the show, highlighting universal human fears about power, trust, and the consequences of ambition. Alongside fan reactions, countless theories emerge, trying to explain her motives, her choices, and the subtle signs of her eventual downfall. Some propose that Araminta's careful demeanor masked deep insecurities or past experiences that influenced her behavior, while others suggest that her ending serves as a commentary on the limitations imposed by society's expectations, particularly for women navigating the rigid hierarchies of Regency-era London. These theories not only reflect engagement with the character, but also show how cleverly the writers designed her arc by leaving room for interpretation. The season encourages viewers to explore the deeper emotional and psychological layers of her story. Additionally, fan engagement often highlights overlooked moments that foreshadow her fate. Subtle gestures, fleeting expressions, or minor interactions that seemed insignificant during the first viewing are now examined in detail, revealing how meticulously the narrative built toward her ending. This deeper analysis reinforces their idea that her downfall was not accidental but carefully foreshadowed, making it more impactful for attentive audiences. The combination of surprise, disappointment, and analytical discussion makes Araminta's arc one of the most talked about storylines in the season. Fans debate not only what went wrong for her, but also whether she could have acted differently or avoided her fate entirely.